Hey everybody, how's it going? Thank you for joining my video today. I'm excited to talk about today's discussion and doing something a little bit different from my normal videos today. But of course, with my channel, if you're interested in, or if you want to know what my channel is all about, it's usually concerning the Christian faith, or politics, or something that I'm interested in talking about uh, at the time, and it could be other things as well. So, but usually I talk kind of off the cuff and want to have the conversation be sort of organic, and I think it's produced some pretty good content so far. But I'm not really used to doing a video log, so I've created quite a few videos up to this point, but recently I haven't been posting as much um, because I've had some issues in my family, some family issues. So I've also just been busy writing and publishing my second book, which so first of all, I'll just show you my books. I've published 2 books in the last year, and so that's kept me really very busy. So this is the first book, which I'd really love if you ordered a copy. It's called The Best Guess. It goes through a lot of different reasons for why I believe the faith is true. And so it's kind of from a personal perspective, but basically, to kind of get a little personal um, about it, I was writing a different book, which I just started working on again, but I haven't worked on since the death of my father. I was writing that book, and after my dad passed away, I was pretty heartbroken, and writing this book, it was mostly apologetics, and I a lot of kind of philosophy. But my other book that I was writing before that was very personal. It had a lot of things about me, and about what happened in my life specifically. And I kind of wanted to take the onus off of myself and think about other things. So, in a way, it was an escape to write this book, but I think it produced, because I put so much of my time and my thought into writing this book, and a lot of effort into writing it. I think it produced some really good arguments, and as I read it, I think there's some ideas, some apologetics that haven't really been touched on before, and then there's other ones that have. So I think there's some original arguments for the reality of the faith in that book. So, and so basically, this video, I just kind of did this offhand, but I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about my books, which my second book just came out this last month, and I actually have a third book on the way. So very excited for that. This second book is cool, but before I say that, I just want to let you know it's very early in the morning. I wasn't able to sleep last night, so I woke up and did some reading and writing, which I tend to do in the morning because I like to start my day out with those things. And so today was a big milestone because I started writing Minutes from God, which was the first book that I was going to publish, but then I stopped writing after the death of my father. And so I just got back into that book. So I'm excited for the chapter that I just wrote today. It's, I think, really powerful. But Minutes from God is going to be, I think I might be most excited for that book, although I'm really excited about this one. Well, God's just been blessing me with the ability to write a lot, and I think He's helped me to write really good things. So here is Big American Problems, and this is my second book, which just came out last month, I believe. I was going to promote it a lot more, but then I had something significant happen in my life and wasn't able to. So this book is more political. So I started writing it basically after everything happened in 2020 with COVID, and then the protests and riots, and just everything since then. there was a major catalyst in my thinking, and my belief system, because I've been a Christian for years now, but haven't really learned to apply my faith to my political beliefs or anything, or thought about that. But this does go into a lot of controversial things, which I think shouldn't be so controversial. I say things in them just as I believe, and a lot of those things I think would be really challenged today. But I've gone over this book a number of times when I was editing it, through the editing process, trying to decipher what was true, or trying to decipher what was not true, what I said that didn't have truth in it. I'm sure there's mistakes in this book. I mean, I'm human, but I feel as though it's a true book, and so for that reason, if I didn't feel like it was true, if I didn't feel like it was beneficial, I would have pressed delete on the entire book. So this book is a significant amount bigger than my other book too, which I'm pretty proud of. So my other book is about 200 pages, and this one is right about 300 pages. So a lot of hard work went into it, and something that I like to do with my books as I'm doing this promotion is to just pick a random page. So let's just stop there, and I'll just read from a random paragraph that I see I'm not even looking. So just so you can get a feel for how the writing is in the book. So so I'll just read one paragraph as a sample, and then you can maybe see if the book is something you're interested in. So this is from page 228. Let's see, the paragraph I pointed at. Afghanistan. The Taliban terrorist organization took control of the country following a botched U.S. withdrawal in August 2021. It has brutally cracked down with Sharia law on various identity groups such as women and Christians. Women rights activists are targeted by the Taliban, and Afghan Christians are considered apostate under Sharia law, a crime punishable by the death sentence. Taliban leaders want Sharia-style brutalities and killings to come back to Afghanistan communities. Atrocities, such as beheading Christians, take place, and the Taliban searches through people's phones to find Christian content in order to accuse and sentence them, even prior to the Taliban gaining power. Afghan Christians were the second most persecuted people on the planet. Now under the Taliban crackdown, the heavy-handed threat Christians live under is greatly multiplied. Like so many other instances of global Christian persecution, what is happening in Afghanistan is largely ignored and filtered through our media by independent fact-checkers. However, it is difficult to fact-check videotaped beheadings and reports coming from on the ground. Many Afghan Christians are turning off their phones for fear that the Taliban now has the technology to track them. There are many reports of Christians who are hunted down for their faith. In some cases, phones are reportedly searched for Bible apps. Having these apps is a crime punishable by death in the eyes of the Taliban. Excuse me. Okay, so that was just a random paragraph from the book that I chose. In that section, I'm talking about global Christian persecution. So I know it's called Big American Problems, my book, but that chapter, that specific section, is in a chapter that's all about kind of the global grip on Christians, and that chapter specifically was looking at the broader scope of all around the world. And in that particular section of that section, I'm looking at the Taliban specifically in Afghanistan and the crisis there, if you read the book, there's lots of information about persecution crammed into that one tiny section, but the whole book isn't that dense of information, like of just facts and news. But as you can see, the book kind of talks about things that the news doesn't really talk about, because we don't hear about the crackdown on Christians all around the world, because that doesn't really fit the little narrative of secular good, Christians bad, that is going on here. I'm not saying it's the opposite, secular bad, Christians good. I'm just saying the narrative in America right now is that Christians are patriarchal tyrants, and secularism is here to free us from the world. Read the book and you'll understand. But you can just, I'll leave the link in my description if I remember. But if not, you can just Google Big American Problems and my name. You can get it from the publishing site, which is Westbow Press, or you can get it from Barnes and Noble, and it's available in other places. So you just Google the title and my name, and you should be able to find it. But I think it's a different book than has ever been written, which I guess every book kind of is. So, anyways, with that in mind, after that 10-minute promotion, thank you for sticking with me through that. I'm going to move into the discussion for today, which is about the ideal. And so this is going to be a little bit of a different discussion. And if you're not familiar with my channel, basically I talk about things I'm not really too sure what the discussion is going to be. I have some semblance of an idea before I go into it, but I like it to be organic, because then some different ideas can kind of bleed into one another and form a meaningful discussion. So that doesn't mean that I'm not prone to make mistakes, so which I have done before. But I'm excited about this discussion because it's capturing some of my interests that are very I think I really enjoy these ideas that I'm learning about right now. And so right now I read a number of books at the same time, and that way I can kind of use the ideas in the books to kind of corroborate one another and parallel one another. And I think that it's helpful to do that when we look at culture, because sometimes for me, when I read one book over and over and over again, I would have a really good understanding of that book, but it would be harder to tie the ideas of that book in with reality, which is really interesting for the book that I'm reading now. So I'm going to plug another book, but this one's pretty old. It's called Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. And actually, I'm going to talk a little bit about that and another book, which I'll be honest, I'm not very far in either of these books, as you can see. I'm kind of near the beginning, but I want to talk about them anyway because I think they're important. This one's called The Possessed, and its other name was Demons by Feyder Dostoevsky. I don't think I can ever pronounce his name correctly, but a very brilliant Russian writer who dealt with psychology, deep ideas of psychology, and I think Cervantes deals with psychology and madness in a really brilliant way as well that I don't think any writer has ever done. So he discusses madness and folly, and I think intellectual. I could be way off on this, but I'm just going to go off on a limb, and I would say that it is a picture in Miguel de Cervantes' book of what happens when our minds are filled with the ideal, with an ideal that isn't actually a part of reality, and so that's what my discussion is kind of based on today. And I thought it would be an interesting segment in my overarching content of my channel, which is mostly concerning theology, sometimes politics, but I think that these two stories are sometimes fiction can tell truth in a way that nonfiction writing can't, in a way that my books, which are nonfiction, kind of don't quite get to that point of truth that Miguel de Cervantes, psychological truth that Miguel de Cervantes was able to express by creating the character Don Quixote, the character Sancho Panza, creating the world, which was the world of 16th century Spain that he was a part of, which does enrich our understanding of that was the time when the Inquisitions were going on, when the conquest of the Americas by the Spanish was happening, and atrocities were happening under the Spanish Catholic Church. And so it begs the question of what the writer Cervantes' ideas of what was happening then really were. Was he for the chivalry that had kind of possessed this? This is going to lead into my other book, but was he for the chivalry that had possessed the idea of Spain and this idea of knighthood and valiant heroism and the ideal that that learning and knowledge and wisdom and even knowledge of the Bible and of the Christian faith, or rather Christendom, because a lot of the things that were done under the Spanish Catholic Church were definitely not approved by Jesus because they were horrible atrocities. But so reading a story about a man who believes himself to be a knight, going on an adventure to find the ideal, or rather to create the ideal that he already was already real within his mind. That so basically the story of for those who are unfamiliar, of Don Quixote, which I'm just at the beginning, but the beginning I think is such an important step into this story because it's the beginning of the adventure. So it's kind of, I think of it as like Bilbo Baggins in the Shire. Bilbo Baggins was very, he was a homebody. He liked to be at home. He wasn't really, just like a lot of the hobbits who were peaceful people. Their life was a life of peace, and they were steadfast and stout-hearted and strong people, but their detriment was that they were lazy and isolationists and kind of cowardly, and they didn't ever want anything from the outside world coming in. Like, for example, Gandalf, who represents the prophet, who represents the man who comes into the story comes into the exposition of the story to actually bring out the story from the exposition, to urge Bilbo Baggins into action, which Bilbo Baggins within himself doesn't see any courage. He doesn't see any ability to defeat the dragon, the biggest dragon in the world, who had and to find all the riches in the world that are housed in the Lonely Mountain, right? And Gandalf does something similar with Frodo, but Frodo's adventure is something different than Bilbo's adventure was. But the theme in Lord of the Rings is intensely human, right? Even though it's a fiction fantasy tale, it expresses symbols that are that deeply resonate with all of us, which is why those stories are so popular, which is why Cervantes' book is so popular, because it's true in a really good sense. It's humorous. It makes us laugh, and it's a tragic comedy because we also feel sorrow and we feel pity for the madness of Don Quixote, which I'm actually in the process of telling this story to a group of like 4 and 5-year-olds. So it's really an interesting process to condense the ideas of Don Quixote, which in a sense is a very interesting story for children because it's something different. There's not stories like it told today, and it's packed with action. I mean, you see this book and it's really dense reading and it's hard reading, but it's filled with action. Every chapter has more action than can be captured in a movie even, and it bridges the ideal and the real into an action story that's also a comedy, that's also a tragedy. But anyways, going back to what happened with Bilbo, Gandalf comes into his home, and if you remember, he brings all the dwarves, and they're going to reclaim their homeland, the Lonely Mountain. And Bilbo is the representation of the strength within the person who, the strength within the person that doesn't realize its capacity for good and for righteousness. And if he were to stay at home and to study his books and read, he would have maybe understood at an intellectual level the adventure that could be the ideal in a sense. But if he was never brought out of his hobbit hole, he would have never learned what real goodness and real righteousness, what these things that he read about and loved at home would be. And eventually what you learn with Lord of the Rings too is that if he stayed at home and only studied these things, and if Frodo did as well, and if they didn't listen to Gandalf the prophet to respond to God's calling, so to speak, to go out to the mountain. There's 2 mountains in those books, Mount Doom and Mount Doom, and the Lonely Mountain, both of which are filled with fire, right? One has a fire-breathing dragon, and which is in The Hobbit, Smaug, and the other has fire from which the greatest capacity for evil ever was forged in the One Ring that had to be destroyed by returning it to the place where it had come from, the chaos, right? So these mountains represent places in which chaos lives, and the only way to bring it out was the small seed of potential for life, potential for the dawn, potential for light to overcome the impending darkness and doom, the loneliness of Smaug, the desolation of Smaug, right? And so to overcome that, the small seed is the most unlikely character to defeat the undefeatable, right? The undefeatable is Sauron with his armies. The undefeatable is Smaug, the largest creature in the known world, who is very intelligent, who is very strong, who can destroy cities with one breath, and because he's a dragon, right? So it's very interesting that, well, of course, in Lord of the Rings and in The Hobbit, these are real people who are really being brought out into the real world, and not just fighting for an ideal, but actually being thrust into circumstances for which they're not ready. But that unreadiness mixed with their character is enough to teach them a lesson from which was brought one of the best stories in the world. Hopefully I'm making sense. Anyways, so in Don Quixote, you have the character who's similar to Bilbo Baggins. Don Quixote is the character, and similar to Bilbo Baggins, he's a homebody. But he spends his time reading stacks of books about knighthood and chivalry and filling his mind with the ideal, and which I think is a fascinating concept. And the ideal, we will just call it chivalry, or perhaps, well, I wouldn't say Christendom, is it? Because as I'm reading this book, I'm seeing that theology is not really a big part of the book. So, which gives you insight into like the real motivations behind knights of that time. Not saying that all knights were bad or that none of the knights were Christians or whatever, but it gives you insight into because one of the biggest failures that is placed on Christianity, which I don't want to extract all of Christianity from what happened in 16th century Spain, is the Inquisitions, the Spanish Inquisitions, and it is the Spanish conquest of the Americas. and the decimation of native populations here, for greed and wealth and lust for power, which you could attribute those ideas to, rather than to the Hobbit, to the dragon of chaos, to Sauron, who wanted to, instead of liberate the world, to take over the world, right? And so I think that begs the question about Don Quixote. Is he the Hobbit? Is he the stout-hearted, wise, the stout-hearted, quasi-isolationist little guy who desires to go out and defeat the giants, right, who end up being windmills? Or is he the dragon, whose mind is so filled with an ideal that he can't visibly see anything outside of the riches in the mountain, right? And whose ideal is driving him to madness, which, as you read in The Hobbit, the madness that overcomes the people who reign over the mountain, Smog, or I can't remember the name of the dwarf king who overtakes the mountain. The madness that claims his heart and drives him to isolate. So if you're thinking about these ideas, these ideals that captivate Don Quixote, sorry, 1 second. These ideals captivate Don Quixote and call him out into the world. So eventually what ends up happening, I'm going to get on with the story here. He dusts off some old armor that was passed down from his ancestors. He stacks his books in the corner. He straps some armor on his face, grabs a shield, grabs a lance and a sword, and mounts his steed Rocinante and rides off into the sunset to go and fight the battles that he's read about. And so one of the illustrations that I love in the book is a picture of Don Quixote setting out valiantly, and it's a very valiant picture, and it's a picture that, let me see if I can actually find it so that it'd be better than me describing it, but I will talk a little bit about this photo as well. So it's a beautiful photo because it has, there it is, it has Don Quixote, as you can see. He's setting out into the unknown. I can't tell if he's facing the sky in this. No, he's facing us. So Don Quixote's facing us in this picture. And as you can see above him in the clouds or in the sky, there's pictures of giant battles, and with his head, his head in the clouds, so to speak, his head's up in the air, and he's going out to live those battles and going out to make them real in a sense. And what you'll find in as the story progresses is that he does find battles, and battles do become real, and danger becomes real, and adventure becomes real, but not in the way that the danger existed because he brought it there with his ideal. I don't know if that makes any sense. Because his madness, if you can even call it madness, comes from a mind that's completely full. Like, I would like to think of him as the person who knows the most about the books that he was reading at the time. He had mastered this material. He had mastered the books of chivalry. And that mastery, when led to apply it to the real world, ended up causing harm to the world, at least in a few of the stories, but also bringing beauty into the world, right? And we see beauty in Don Quixote, and his quest, and that's what keeps us intrigued by the story, and that's what causes us to root for Don Quixote, even in some cases when he becomes the villain, not through any not through any kind of malice or maleficence that lives in his heart, but purely through the creation of his own world, that he threatens the real world as he tries to make it conform to what his own desires are. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my screen and it looks like there's like a light coming in, but it's actually really early in the morning here, so I don't know if that's, it looks like those are trees. Anyways, I'm all over the place, but it makes me think of that proverb: the light of righteousness is like the first gleam of dawn, shining ever brighter until the noonday sun. Yay. Which is a lot like what we're talking about, right? So going out into the day to face the adventure and to defeat the night. So anyways, these are the stories I just wanted to talk about, but I'm going at about a half hour now. So let me know what you think in the comments, and I hope you enjoyed this lecture. I didn't really get around to talking about The Possessed, but maybe I can spend 3 or 4 minutes talking about that now. So The Possessed is a book by Dostoevsky, which takes place in... Okay, I really don't know that much about this book, so I could be way off on my interpretations, but I think that some of the ideas are applicable. So basically what it's talking about is, well, there are 2 names for the book, which are very telling about what the book is. It's the demons and the possessed, so which don't have the same meaning, because demons are active possessors and the possessed are people who are empty vessels, right, for whatever demon is going to come into them and possess. So so as we're talking about ideals with Miguel de Cervantes, the ideal is what possesses these people in 19th century Russia, just before the Bolshevik Revolution. And Dostoevsky's experiment in The Possessed is to deep dive into the psychology of these people, who were largely driven, and I think it corroborates modern society, by a plurality of isms: nihilism, secularism, atheism, Marxism. Well, postmodernism wasn't even a thing then, but I would say that it was in some sort of form that had not yet been defined. And so I think it corresponds right now to a lot of the ideologies that can possess people today and cause them to go in search of adventure, right? In search of finding the giants that actually just turned out to be windmills, and battling those windmills, and ultimately being thrown on their heels by the windmills. So anyways, I just wanted to add that in at the end there, but I really hope you enjoyed this video today. I don't know, I felt like I wanted to express that story, and I felt like God has put these stories on my heart for a reason, and not just to blow smoke up my butt, but to express that these stories, they have reality. Lord of the Rings has a reality to it, and I did another video on Lord of the Rings, so if you want to go find that, you can find that on my page. But these stories aren't true stories, they're fiction. But in a way, by creating these characters and by creating these worlds, in order to express both the author's own understanding of these ideals, and the ideals that were driving the worldviews of those times that they were living in, they were able to also speak into our own time in a way that they couldn't if they were just teaching about what the ideals were, without actually having them be expressed by a person who became the ideal, or people who become the ideal, and showing how that and I keep saying ideal, but I think that's the right word to explain the worldview, to show how that worldview in some cases corrupts the world, changes the world, or contributes to the world, and or operates within the world, how it reacts to the world. And anyways, so those are my thoughts for today. So thank you so much for joining. I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, buy my books, and look out for the next ones that are on the way, because they're coming soon, sooner than you think. Thank you. God bless.